Hey guys, so this video aims to cover everything you'd ever need to know about sword flying and compile everything we currently know and apply to the speedrun of Halo 2. So sword flies are probably the most impressive thing to watch in Halo 2 and are incredibly satisfying to perform yourself. As a result, when people are trying to learn the speedrun, it is something that they often focus on right at the start. Sword flies don't save as much time in the speedrun as they once did, due to the introduction of butterflies throughout the run. However, they remain quintessential to the Halo 2 speedrun experience, and so I feel this video is absolutely necessary to have for new players so they can get all the information that they could ever need. So I'm doing this video in an FAQ format so you can find the information that you want as easily as possible. Just go to the question that you are asking for, or if you're completely unfamiliar, just watch the entire video. It should hopefully help you a lot. So the first question is as simple as, what is a swordfly? So swordfly is just a really long range sword lunge. As you should know, when you have an energy sword, if you have a red reticle, pressing the shoot button will lunge you to an enemy, so that's what we call a sword lunge. A swordfly allows us to do this from long distances. The behavior is the exact same as a sword lunge, but the difference is that we use the red reticle of our primary weapon as opposed to our sword. Can I sword fly on Halo 2 on Master Chief Collection? Yes! Sword flying was patched back into Halo 2 Master Chief Collection in August 2018. Both console and PC versions contain sword flying. No matter what anyone tells you, you can sword fly on Master Chief Collection. So originally the game launched without sword flying, so that's obviously where the misinformation came from. So the reason for this is because MCC was originally built off of Halo 2 Vista, and Halo 2 Vista was built off a later build of the original Halo 2, in which sword flying was already patched. So you can sword fly on original Halo 2, but it requires you to unpatch your game. So back when Bungie actually patched sword flying on original Halo 2, they wanted to keep it for campaign but remove it from where it was clearly unfair in multiplayer. This wasn't possible at the time, but with the Halo 2 Master Chief Collection, 343 were able to patch campaigns separately from multiplayer, and as a result they actually patched sword flying back into the Master Chief Collection to work purely in campaign, and it's possible for the rest of time. How do I sword fly? So first of all, you have to have a red reticle with your primary weapon. Obviously your distance from the enemy and whether you're scoped in or not will affect the red reticle. In general, the rocket launcher is the best weapon for obtaining a red reticle, as it's both very long ranged and has a big reticle. I suggest using this or the fuel rod for practicing your sword flies. Once you have the red reticle, you need to hit the button combo for a sword fly. This is famously YXR, or more precisely for other button layouts and keyboard and mouse, you need to switch weapon, reload, and then shoot. The weapon switch is obviously to pull out your sword. The reload in Halo 2 cancels animations, so by cancelling the switch weapon animation fast enough, we can maintain the property of our primary weapon's reticle whilst having our sword's reticle out. This happens for only a very short amount of time. The exact amount of time I will talk about in detail later. So once you have the sword reticle with your primary weapon's red reticle behavior, we need to press shoot in order to perform the sword lunge from a distance. That is a sword fly. What is the timing of inputs for a sword fly? So it's fast, real fast. Seriously though, up until the PC release, nobody knew the exact timings. We just always gave the advice of input all three inputs, obviously switch weapon, reload, shoot, as fast as possible without overlapping the inputs. This is still good advice, generally speaking, but I'll show you exact timings that I've determined using macro software. Okay, so here is the timing that you want to be aiming for. This will allow you to hit all sword flies. So for this, my inputs are Q for weapon switch, R for reload, and button 1 for shoot. So let's talk about what this shows us. Firstly, if you're not familiar with what the ms means after the numbers in this, ms is a millisecond or 0.001 seconds. So in this, for example, we see a 31 ms, that is 0.031 seconds, or roughly 1/30th of a second. So weapon switch input is the first input you see here. The weapon switch input goes through as you release the button as opposed to when you press it. So the Q going upwards, that's the release of weapon switch, that's the important input there. So the first timing we show, which is 50 ms here, it doesn't actually matter. This can be as long or as short as you apply. So as you release the weapon switch, you want to press reload. The best timing for this is to press reload at the exact same time as you release weapon switch. So reload acts differently to weapon switch. Reload goes through as you press it down, not as you release it. So how long you hold down the reload doesn't really matter for hitting the actual fly itself. Keeping it held down will cancel the damage from the sword lunge if you do intend to do so, but you can release it whenever you please. Then 31 milliseconds after hitting reload, you need to press shoot. So the 31 milliseconds actually corresponds to 2 in-game ticks. So Master Chief Collection Halo 2 runs at 60 tick rate, which means there are 60 ticks in a second. You can get sword flies with the shoot input rate being anywhere within the second tick after the reload. So that is anywhere between 17 and 34 milliseconds after the reload. However, I will say that I had issues with consistency when testing timeframes on the lower end of this range. So when I had the input being 17 or 18 milliseconds later, sometimes I wouldn't actually get the sword fly to go through. I can't say for sure what caused this, but at such a short time frame, there is likely error from the macro software and how the game responds to the macro software. So I say 31 milliseconds. It is 2 ticks anywhere around 1/30th of a second is what you're aiming for. Okay, so for shooting, the action applies as you press the button, not as you release it. So it's the same as the reload. We can again hold down the shoot button for as long as we want. It doesn't affect the sword fly itself. So in the end, we get this. Obviously, input and shoot in such a small window so quickly after hitting a reload is difficult, but sword flying is difficult. That is the point. It's going to require a lot of practice to get the muscle memory down for this. You're looking at hitting 2 inputs at the same time and then hitting 1/30th of a second later. It is definitely possible. People are consistent with it. It just takes time to get the muscle memory. I suggest just trying to shoot as fast as possible after hitting reload, but make sure you're not hitting them at the same time. So these are just some quick clips of me hitting sword flies on controller and keyboard. The controller ones, I can't say for certain whether those would have all worked, but you get a rough idea of the timing. The keyboard one 100% worked, so I put that in slow motion as well, just so you can get a better look. For that, I actually hold down the Q button and then reload shoot afterwards. Does frame rate affect swordfly timing? So, experienced speedrunners noticed a difference in the ease of sword flying between the original version of Halo 2 and the anniversary Halo 2 found on Master Chief Collection. The original runs at 30 FPS and the latter runs at 60 FPS. The difference was not put down to the actual visual frame rate, but instead to the game's tick rate. This is a number independent of visual frame rate, which determines how often the game checks for actions. So original Halo 2 runs at 30 Hz, 30 tick rate, whereas Halo 2 MCC runs at 60 Hz, 60 tick rate. This difference causes a lot of differences between the two versions, and was again thought to be the reason for different swordfly timings between the two versions. With the release of PC MCC, we can now run Halo 2 Master Chief Collection at a higher visual frame rate than 60 FPS. I've found that doing so directly affects swordfly timing. So the answer to the question is yes. So this is in spite of the fact that the game is 60 tick rate no matter what your visual FPS is. So you can be running the game at 500 FPS, but the tick rate will consistently remain at 60 tick rate. So this is something that we didn't actually anticipate, but at frame rates higher than 120 FPS, you actually need to shoot one game tick earlier than the timing showed previously. So one game tick corresponds to roughly 17 milliseconds. So if I rejig the timing from the previous question, I can give you the result here. So this is the new inputs needed to successfully swordfly at above 120 FPS. You now have less time to input the shoot button. On the front of it, it looks like it might be harder to swordfly at a higher FPS, so running at 60 FPS may be the key. However, the timing window remains the same. You still have one full tick in which you can input the shoot button. So now it's between 1 and roughly 20 milliseconds as opposed to between 17 and 34 milliseconds that we saw before. So the window is simply shifted 17 milliseconds earlier. So bear in mind this when you are attempting to swordfly on PC. If you're playing at unlimited FPS and you're above 120, you need to be inputting slightly faster than if you are locked to 60 FPS. What about the timing on Halo 2 Classic? Okay, so what if we go the other way and look at the lower FPS found on the original Halo 2, Halo 2 Classic? So I can use mods to edit my MCC tick rate down to 30 Hz, so it matches the 30 tick rate found on the original Halo 2. Doing so gave me the following results. You now have to delay the shot input more than what you did at 60 FPS, matching the trend that we saw from when we increased the FPS above 120. So the window for inputting shoot after reload is now somewhere between 35 and 65 milliseconds. So what is happening here? We still actually need to shoot 2 ticks after the reload like we saw at 60 FPS and 60 tick rate. Although now we're at 30 tick rate. So each tick is now 1/30th of a second instead of 1/60th. This is roughly 34 milliseconds. So the result is that we have to input later, and we also have a larger timing window. The timing window is now doubled for hitting the swordfly. So the result is basically that swordflies on Halo 2 Classic are easier. I can get swordflies whilst not scoped, but I can't hit scoped flies. Why is that? Now all the timings I've shown so far will give you success with both scoped and unscoped flies. However, unscoped flies can be hit with a different and actually easier timing. So now you might be like, whoa, why didn't you tell us this earlier? So I think it's really important to just get the muscle memory down for scoped flies, and then you can apply it to all flies, as opposed to trying to differentiate between the two. But I feel like I need to explain this anyway, because the difference causes issues to new players, so let's get into the differences. So the timing for a non-scoped fly is as follows. You can see that the timing between reload and shoot remains the same, and all the rules of differing frame rates remains. However, now we can have a delay between the weapon switch release and the reload press. This delay can be anywhere between 0 and 10 ticks. This results from the game taking 10 ticks for the reticle switch to occur. We have that time to press reload. So if you've been able to get unscoped flies, but not scoped flies, you almost certainly need to be pressing reload faster. The reason all of this is this way is due to the reload causing an immediate switch of weapon reticle to the sword by cancelling the switch animation. This only works when in scope if you hit reload at the exact same time as the weapon switch release. But if you're not scoped in, you can do this anywhere within the 10 ticks that it takes to switch weapon reticles. I hit a swordfly without pressing reload. How did I do that? Okay, so this is what I will call a 2-input swordfly. It requires only weapon switch and shoot inputs. It may sound easier based upon only that information, but it's actually probably the hardest way to swordfly, and it only works when you are unscoped. It works off the fact that I mentioned previously. The game requires 10 ticks to switch weapon reticle after pressing the switch weapon input. When we press reload, we cancel the animation and force an immediate reticle change, and so we can swordfly with a reload press within the first 10 ticks. after a weapon switch input. However, if we don't input reload, and we instead wait for the full 10 ticks, and then press shoot, we can actually sword fly. This results from the fact, on the 10th tick, once our sword comes out, we have a red reticle with our sword for exactly 1 tick. So if we press weapon switch, wait 10 ticks, press shoot, we can sword fly. So now I'm going to move away from the timing stuff. I think I've covered everything you ever need to know. Now it's up to you to get the muscle memory to hit those sword flies. We're going to move on to applications of sword flying in the speedrun. So the first question, how do I sword fly over an enemy? When flying towards an enemy, you can input jump to gain height. This is a key feature to sword flying in the speedrun, and jumping at specific times can allow us to get heights that we desire. However, inputting jump alone will get us over the enemy, but we will quickly lose speed as our lunge is aimed at the enemy. We can prevent this by cancelling the lunge altogether. So this requires a reload input or a weapon switch input. This time, when we go over the enemy's head, we will keep our speed and reach longer distances. So in short, to fly over an enemy, press the jump input and press reload and or switch weapon before you reach the enemy, and you will fly over their heads. What is a mid-air stop, and how do I perform one? You will often hear speedrunners refer to mid-air stops during sword flies. These can sometimes be desired, and so it is important to know how to force one. So what are they? As the name suggests, it is where you stop suddenly whilst in mid-air during a sword fly. So if we jump to fly over an enemy's head, it is possible to stop directly above them whilst in the air. This is a mid-air stop. This can occur out of the player's control if the enemy moves as you're trying to pass over them. We can also force a mid-air stop if we want to go above the enemy but not beyond them. This is done by the player turning left, right, or directly down before you go over the enemy's head. The turn should aim to be 90 degrees or more if you want to ensure that the mid-air stop will occur. Can I kill enemies with a sword fly? Yes, a sword fly is identical to a sword lunge, and so the damage matches that of a sword lunge. In order to kill an enemy with the sword fly, you must not input reload or weapon switch during the fly, as these will cancel the lunge and you will simply fly into the enemy and do no sword damage. Also, don't jump, as mentioned previously, this will send us flying over the enemy's head. Just input the sword fly combo and wait until you hit the enemy. What happens if I collide with a wall or object in the middle of a sword fly? If you collide with a wall or object, you will be redirected depending on the angle of the object, and you will keep flying for the duration that you would if you were flying straight at the enemy. Once you've flown for that duration, you'll mid-air stop wherever you are. We use this behavior to our benefit a few times in the speedrun for what we call redirect sword flies. How do I pick up a weapon during a sword fly? It is possible to pick up a weapon in the middle of a sword fly, swapping out your sword for whichever weapon is in your way. The only time we regularly do this in the speedrun is on Cairo Station Legendary for what we call the PP pickup fly, PP being plasma pistol. This is a technique that is much easier on controller, at least at the time when I'm making this video. The reason for this is that on controller, the X button is both reload and action. So action is picking up a weapon, and reload is obviously what we use for a sword fly. On PC MCC, you cannot bind two inputs to the same button, at least at the time of making this video. I'm hoping that it's patched in the future. So on controller, you would do a YXR as normal, except when you perform the sword fly combination, you need to keep that X button held down. So as soon as you pass by the weapon that you want to pick up, you will swap out your sword for said weapon. It's as simple as that. YXR, but keep X held down the entire time. As if you let go of X and try to input it a second time, it will not work. You will not be able to switch out your sword. For keyboard, the inputs are as followed. These are the same as a normal swordfly, but you also have to hit the action input at the same time as the reload. So you do a normal swordfly, but you have an extra input involved. So you now have to release weapon switch, hit reload, and hit action all at the exact same time. Keep the action button held down until you've picked up your desired weapon. Sometimes when I swordfly, I get sucked into the ground. What's with that? In all honesty, we don't know all the causes of this. There are several spots within the speedrun in which this can occur. One reason for it occurring is standing too close to an edge that has downward projection, as seen by the flyers on Regret and High Charity. It can also occur when you're in the air. The exact cause for these types of flyers is unclear, but it likely has something to do with enemy position, as seen by this swordfly on Cairo Station. For all these flyers, just be ready to hit jump as soon as possible in case this does occur. If you jump immediately, you can redirect yourself up and still go upwards over the enemy. That's all I've got for this video. This should hopefully cover everything you need to know about swordflies, especially for the speedrun. If you have any follow-up questions or queries, you can ask in the comments or reach out to me on Discord or Twitch, and I'll get back to you. Have fun flying.